The house was quiet in that deep, heavy way only the earliest hours of morning could create. Outside, the winter air pressed against the windows of the Shaws' Cambridge home, and the street was still, the neighborhood asleep. At 3 a.m., Eleanor Shaw woke abruptly, her heart beating just a little too hard for no clear reason. She wasn't someone who startled easily, yet something had tugged her out of sleep with a sharp, instinctive pull. It took her a moment to understand what she was hearing. A voice, low, tense, almost excited, drifted up the hallway. Richard's voice. She pushed the covers back and sat up, listening. The kitchen light was on, a faint, warm glow spilled down the hall. His words were hushed, but the tone carried a strange urgency she had never heard from him before. No, it has to be before that. Yes, the documents, the timing has to be perfect. Eleanor froze. Richard was whispering. Richard, her husband of 25 years, who never whispered. Not even when he was trying to surprise her. His voice held none of his usual morning calm or evening weariness. Instead, it carried a nervous energy, almost excitement, tinged with something sharper beneath it. She strained to catch more, her breath held in her chest. I told you, I'm handling it, no. She has no idea. A quiet pause. Fine. I'll call you tomorrow. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the blanket. She waited until the sound of his footsteps crossed the kitchen, then eased herself back under the covers, careful to make no sound. When the bedroom door finally creaked open, she shut her eyes and pretended to sleep. Richard slipped in quietly, too quietly, and lay beside her without a word. Eleanor stayed still, every nerve awake. The whispering, the secrecy, the tension in his voice. It floated around her like a cold draft she couldn't escape. By morning, Richard was a different man, or at least he pretended to be. He was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, humming as he scrambled eggs, smiling in a way that felt rehearsed. Morning, sweetheart, he said cheerfully. I made breakfast. Thought we could eat together. Eleanor blinked at him. Richard never made breakfast. On weekdays, he usually rushed out with a travel mug of coffee, barely remembering to kiss her on the cheek. He set a plate in front of her as if this were a normal habit. I was thinking, he continued, sliding into the chair opposite hers, we should really start planning our 25th anniversary. Silver wedding, it's a big deal. We should celebrate properly this year. She searched his face, trying to reconcile the cheerful man before her with the whispering voice from the night before. Something about him didn't match. His smile was bright, too bright, stretched just a little too far. She felt it. The disconnect, the falseness, the forced warmth. He talked about venues, guest lists, the kind of champagne they should serve. He hadn't shown this level of enthusiasm about anything together in years. Eleanor nodded slowly, watching him pour himself more coffee. Her mind replayed the fragments she had heard. Documents, timing, she has no idea. At one point, Richard got up to take a call, leaving his phone on the counter. It buzzed a few minutes later with a reminder. Call R. The screen lit up with the words, simple, bare, unmistakably deliberate. When he returned, she gently asked, Who's R? Richard didn't hesitate. Just work, he said, waving a hand as if the subject bored him. You know how it is. Nothing important. But his eyes shifted away from hers. That was the moment the dread settled. Not like a sudden blow, but like a slow, creeping fog that moved quietly into the corners of her mind. She pressed her hands together under the table, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She told herself not to overthink, not to jump to conclusions, not after 25 years of marriage. But the truth was already forming inside her, quiet but undeniable. Something was wrong. Something had begun in the middle of that night, in the whispering she wasn't supposed to hear. And even though Eleanor tried to dismiss it, the first small seed of suspicion had already taken root. The following afternoon unfolded quietly, the kind of ordinary weekday where Eleanor usually lost herself in work emails and household tasks. But around 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent, unexpected. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. Martha Shaw stood on the porch, wrapped in her long wool coat, her expression carrying its usual mixture of formality and unspoken critique. "Eleanor," she said briskly, stepping inside before being invited. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Eleanor knew Martha was never in the neighborhood. She lived in a spacious condo in Back Bay and rarely left it without purpose. Still, she forced a polite smile. "Of course. Come in." The moment Martha entered the living room, her eyes began their familiar sweep, slow, assessing, quietly judgmental. She glanced at the framed photos on the wall, the modest but well-kept furniture, the soft rugs Eleanor loved. "It's cozy," Martha said after a moment, her tone laced with that gentle condescension she had perfected over the years. "Of course, my apartment has a bit more natural light, and the ceilings are higher, but this is nice in its own way." Eleanor said nothing. She'd learned long ago that Martha's comparisons were not invitations for debate. Martha settled onto the couch, smoothing her skirt. "Tell me, dear, have you and Richard thought about the future lately?" "The future?" Eleanor repeated cautiously. "Yes," Martha said, waving her hand as though her thoughts were grand and benevolent. "Things like long-term planning, inheritance, grandchildren." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Martha, you know we don't have children." "Oh, I'm aware," Martha replied, sounding almost annoyed by the reminder. "But families are more than biological children. Richard has cousins, nephews, young people who could benefit someday. One should always think ahead." Eleanor felt a faint chill move through her. Martha wasn't here to chat. She was circling something. Then Martha leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was confiding a secret. For the sake of clarity in the family, it might be wise to consider transferring this apartment now. You never know what could happen. Ensuring it goes to the right heirs is important. Eleanor stared at her. "This apartment?" she asked quietly. "Yes, dear," Martha said with a rehearsed softness. "Just imagine if anything happened to you or Richard. Wouldn't it be better to have it already sorted? For the next generation." There was no next generation. There were only Martha's nephews, young men she had always favored. Young men who had nothing to do with Eleanor's life or sacrifices. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" "Oh, nothing drastic," Martha said, smiling thinly. "A simple transfer, a gift deed. That way the apartment becomes part of the family legacy, a home for future heirs." Future heirs. Her tone made it clear she did not mean Eleanor's side of the family. Then came the question, the one that made the entire conversation tilt. "By the way," Martha added casually, "where do you keep the deed for this place? I imagine it's somewhere safe, of course, but these things should be accessible. Emergencies happen." The chill moved deeper into Eleanor's spine. "In the safe," she answered calmly. "Why?" "Oh, no reason," Martha replied quickly. "Just good to know where everything is. When families get older, planning becomes important. It's responsible." Eleanor forced a polite nod, but her mind was spinning. The whispering phone call at 3 a.m. Richard's sudden cheerfulness. The reminder to call R. And now Martha, asking for the deed and talking about inheritance that didn't exist. When Martha finally stood to leave, she gave Eleanor a pat on the arm. Light, performative, insincere. "Think about what I said, dear. It's for the good of the family." As soon as the door clicked shut, silence filled the house. Eleanor remained standing in the foyer, staring at the wood grain of the door as though it could answer the questions forming in her mind. Pieces of a hidden picture were falling into place. Not fully, not enough to name aloud, but enough to frighten her. enough to tell her that something was being orchestrated. After a long moment, she walked to Richard's study. She sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and typed in the password they had both used for years, the date they first met. Access denied. She tried again. Denied. For the first time in their marriage, Richard had changed it. The truth pressed closer, cold and undeniable. Something was happening behind her back, and it had already begun. The house felt strangely hollow after Martha's visit, as if she had taken something warm with her and replaced it with a quiet, unsettling draft. Eleanor walked into Richard's study with the weight of unanswered questions pressing against her ribs. The laptop sat closed on the desk, looking ordinary, safe, familiar, but everything about it now felt different. She opened it, tried the old password again. Denied. The rejection stung, not because she wanted to invade Richard's privacy, but because the change confirmed what her instincts already knew. Someone who had nothing to hide would never bother altering something so routine. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, then opened the browser. Richard had always been careless about clearing his history. Within seconds, a list of recent searches filled the screen. Massachusetts, divorce, property rights. How to secure assets before separation. Can a spouse be removed from the house deed? Divorce without spouse's consent. Eleanor's breath caught. She scrolled further. Anniversary speech ideas. Public announcement event. It was all there. The betrayal, the planning, the strategy. Richard wasn't simply thinking about leaving. He was preparing for it, preparing to take as much as he could, while positioning himself as the noble, wounded party. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Not trembling, no, that had passed. Instead, a quiet numbness spread through her, a coolness that felt like steel sliding into place beneath her skin. Her phone vibrated suddenly, the sound startling her out of the trance. Sarah Monroe, her longtime friend and co-worker. Eleanor answered. Hey, Sarah. Eleanor. Sarah's voice wavered with hesitation. I've been debating whether to call you. I didn't want to upset you unless I was sure. A small knot formed in Eleanor's stomach. What is it? I was at the Prudential Center this afternoon, Sarah said slowly, and I saw Richard. Eleanor closed her eyes. Okay, he wasn't alone. A pause. He was with a younger woman. Tall, blonde, maybe early 30s. She was trying on rings at the jewelry counter. Expensive ones. Eleanor swallowed. Did he see you? No. I ducked behind a display before he turned around. I didn't want a scene. But, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I think her name was Madison? Madison Cole? I heard one of the associates greet her. Madison Cole. The name struck like a quiet punch, sharp, undeniable. Eleanor had seen the name before, on an office holiday invitation, on Richard's email CC list, a new assistant, fresh out of graduate school, smiling too brightly in photos. Sarah exhaled softly. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the darkened window, the faint outline of a woman trying not to break. But she didn't cry. She didn't even feel the urge to. Something else was growing inside her instead. Thank you for telling me, she said calmly. That evening, Richard came home humming, swinging the door open like a man with nothing but good news in the world. He kissed Eleanor's cheek, set down his briefcase, and poured himself a glass of wine, his best imitation of a loving husband. Long day, he said cheerfully, but productive. I think everything's coming together nicely. We should talk more about the anniversary dinner. It's going to be unforgettable. She watched him smile at her. Too wide, too eager, too fake. So, she asked gently, anything interesting happened today? Richard froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for her to notice, before letting out a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Nothing special, just work, meetings, same old routine. He talked fast, filling the room with noise instead of truth. He told her stories about co-workers, about traffic, about the restaurant manager he'd spoken to. Every detail sounded suspiciously crafted, as if he had practiced a script. Eleanor sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm. But inside her the landscape was shifting. Confusion was gone. Hope was gone. Even fear was gone. What remained was clarity, cold, precise, and steady as a blade. She now understood the betrayal wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a plan, a strategy, a stage performance with an ending he thought he controlled. And Eleanor knew, as she sat quietly watching him talk, that her world had already changed forever. Eleanor woke the next morning with a weight in her chest that felt both familiar and strangely transformed. The previous night's discoveries, the searches, the jewelry store citing Madison Cole's name, had stripped away the last traces of denial. She wasn't imagining things. Something deliberate, calculated, and cruel was unfolding around her. She didn't call Richard. She didn't confront him. Instead, she got dressed, slipped her documents into a neat leather folder, and took the red line into Boston. Irene Blake's office overlooked Post Office Square, a modern glass and oak space softened by plants and well-worn law books. Eleanor hadn't seen Irene in several months, but the moment she stepped inside, her friend looked up from the conference table, saw her expression, and stood. "Ellie," she said softly, "sit. Tell me everything." Eleanor did. The midnight whisper, the changed computer password, the browser history, Martha's probing questions about inheritance, Sarah seeing Richard with Madison at the jewelry counter. By the time she finished, Irene's jaw was tight with controlled anger, the kind she reserved for the most manipulative spouses she'd seen in court. "This isn't garden variety infidelity," Irene said, leaning forward. "This is a setup." Eleanor swallowed. "I thought so too, but I needed to hear it from someone who understands the law." Irene tapped a pen against her legal pad. "They're preparing a psychological ambush. It's textbook. Isolation, sudden affection, a big public event like an anniversary dinner or family gathering. And then when you're off balance, pressure to sign over property. They want your apartment. And if he's been researching asset protection before separation, he's planning to hit you with papers immediately after." Eleanor felt a cold shiver run through her, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. "What do I do?" she asked. Irene sat straighter, switching fully into attorney mode. "First, documentation. Everything you've told me, write it down. Dates, times, what you heard, what you saw. Who told you what. Send it to yourself in an email so it becomes a time-stamped record." "Okay." "Second," Irene continued, "secure your financial autonomy. Do you have private accounts?" "One," Eleanor said. "A small savings account from before we married. I never touched it. Move funds into it. Not joint money, only what's yours. And only a portion. Enough to protect yourself, not enough to provoke suspicion. You need runway in case he freezes the joint account. Which, trust me, men like Richard always do." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Third," Irene said, lowering her voice, "gather documents. Deed copies, mortgage statements, tax records, birth certificates, your marriage certificate, everything. Keep originals hidden somewhere he never looks." "I can do that." "Fourth," Irene added, "do not confront him. Not yet. Stay absolutely silent. Let them think you're unaware. That's your advantage. They expect you to be emotional, reactive, easy to corner. Don't give them anything." A strange steadiness settled over Eleanor. "He's planning to embarrass me." "Yes," Irene replied. "Public humiliation is a common tactic. They want you overwhelmed, so you'll sign whatever they put in front of you." Eleanor looked down at her hands, surprised by how still they were. "I won't give them that satisfaction." Irene's gaze softened. "Good. Because you're smarter than both of them put together. You've built a stable life, a home, a career, things that intimidate people like Richard and Martha. They need you to feel small. Don't let them. For the first time in weeks, something warm flickered in Eleanor's chest. Not joy, but resolve. The kind that grows quietly, cleanly, the way dawn spreads across a winter sky. Irene walked her to the elevator. Keep your routine the same, she instructed. Act normal. Watch. Listen. And when the moment comes, you'll be ready. Eleanor stepped out onto the bustling downtown sidewalk. Cars rumbled past, office workers hurried by, and the cold sharpness of the Boston air cleared her thoughts. The city moved around her with calm purpose, and for the first time, she felt aligned with it, not spiraling, not powerless, but anchored. She returned home that afternoon quieter, steadier, every step measured. Richard would come back at his usual hour, cheerful and performative, rehearsing whatever story he needed her to believe. And she would smile, and listen, and wait, because now she finally understood the game being played, and she knew she would not be the one caught unprepared. The next morning unfolded quietly, almost deceptively so. A soft drizzle tapped against the kitchen windows while Eleanor made tea, moving with a calm she hadn't felt in weeks. Richard had left early, too early, murmuring something about a site visit and long meetings, his tone overeager, his smile stretched thin. Eleanor didn't believe a word of it, but she didn't need to. Not anymore. Around noon, the doorbell rang. A uniformed courier stood on the porch, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope with a New York law firm's embossed seal. The sight of it made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with an inexplicable sense of gravity. Delivery for Mrs. Eleanor Shaw. Signature required. She signed, thanked him, and carried the envelope inside, her fingers brushing over the heavy paper. She knew her Aunt Margaret in New York had passed 6 months ago, but the estate had been tied up in probate. Eleanor assumed there would be little left. Margaret had lived simply despite her Manhattan address. Still, something about the envelope felt significant. She sat at the dining table, slid her thumb beneath the seal and opened it. Inside was a letter from the Manhattan executor and a stack of formal documents. The first page made her inhale sharply. A condominium on the Upper West Side. Market value, $2.3 million. She blinked, reread the number, and felt her pulse thrum in her ears. The next page listed a Lakeview cottage in Vermont, near Lake Willoughby, a property she vaguely remembered visiting as a child. Appraised value, $780,000. The final document detailed an investment account and checking balance totaling just over $640,000. Eleanor set the papers down slowly, her hand steady but her breath uneven. She wasn't just comfortable. She wasn't just protected. She was independently wealthy. For a long moment, she simply sat there, absorbing what this meant. Not just financially, but strategically, emotionally, practically. Richard could know. Not now. Not until the moment she chose. This inheritance changed the entire landscape. Irene had warned her about a psychological ambush, about a public scene designed to crush her composure and force her into signing over assets. But this shifted the power entirely. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't cornered. She had options. She had her own foundation, one that Richard had no claim to, not under Massachusetts law. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, letting out a long, controlled exhale. The rain against the windows felt gentler now, almost melodic. For the first time since the midnight whisper, her fear loosened. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Richard. She stared at the screen before answering, steadying her voice. "Hello." "Ellie," he burst out, louder and brighter than usual. "I was just thinking of you. Listen, I had the most amazing idea for our silver anniversary celebration." She said nothing, letting him fill the silence. I mean, 25 years, he continued, his tone almost theatrical. We should celebrate big. I'm talking a full banquet room, maybe at that place by the waterfront. 100 guests, live music, the whole thing. What do you think? Eleanor closed her eyes. There it was, the stage, the audience, the moment he planned to corner her. A public humiliation dressed as a grand romantic gesture. Richard wasn't planning a celebration. He was building a trap. That sounds elaborate, she said gently, keeping her tone neutral. He laughed too quickly. Well, you only hit 25 once, right? And people love seeing long marriages, still going strong. It's important we show that. Show. Always a show. A curated performance for an audience he hoped to manipulate. Eleanor pressed her fingertips to the edge of the inheritance documents, grounding herself. Yes, she said softly. I understand. Great, he replied, breathlessly enthusiastic. We'll talk details tonight. After he hung up, Eleanor stared at the now silent phone. He had no idea who he was dealing with anymore. The woman he planned to humiliate, the one he assumed was cornered, financially dependent, emotionally vulnerable, no longer existed. In her place sat a woman with an Upper West Side condo, a Vermont lakeside property, and more financial freedom than he could ever imagine. A woman who finally understood her worth, and who would choose the moment of truth, not him. And when that moment came, Richard Shaw would discover that the stage he built for her humiliation was about to become the stage for his downfall. 2 days later, under a pale winter sun, Eleanor walked into the office of Peter Caldwell, an estate and real estate attorney Irene had personally recommended. His office sat on the upper floor of a restored brownstone in Back Bay, quiet and dignified, with framed maps of old Massachusetts lining the walls. Peter rose when she entered, offering a steady handshake. Irene told me you were coming. Please sit. Let's take a look at what you brought. Eleanor handed him her folder. The Cambridge deed, the purchase documents, tax filings, and her inheritance papers. Peter adjusted his glasses, methodically reviewing each page with a practiced calm. After several minutes, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Shaw, he said, tapping the Cambridge deed with his pen, your home is 100% separate property. You purchased it 5 years before you got married, under Massachusetts law, unless you refinanced it jointly or added your husband to the deed, which you did not. He has no legal claim to it. Eleanor exhaled, feeling tension release from her shoulders. So Richard can't touch it? Not even remotely, Peter replied. Not in divorce, not in separation, not in probate. It's not marital property, and I'll put that in writing. He began preparing a notarized confirmation, his tone reassuring but firm. I've seen cases like this, he continued. Spouses who believe they're entitled to things they never built, never earned. But legally, you're ironclad. This home is yours. Eleanor watched the notary stamp descend onto the document, sharp, final, unquestionable. Something inside her settled. This wasn't just emotional strength now. This was legal armor. Peter placed the certified copies into a protective sleeve. Keep these somewhere safe. And I suggest scanning them to an encrypted drive. People get unpredictable when money and separation are in play. She nodded. I understand. And one more thing, he added gently. If you sense he's planning something, don't confront him. Let him act. The more he does, the more documentation you have. Eleanor almost smiled at the symmetry of his words with Irene's earlier advice. Yes, I've been told to stay quiet. Good, Peter said. Silence is your advantage. She thanked him, stepped back out onto the brick-lined street, and felt the Boston wind sweep across her face. Today, that cold air didn't sting. It clarified. She had something Richard didn't expect, the law on her side, and something else, her inheritance he knew nothing about. As she walked toward the T station, she felt a steady confidence rising in her chest. The trap he was building would never hold. Not with the foundation she now had. When Eleanor arrived home, she brewed herself tea and checked the bank app on her phone, a habit she'd formed since Irene warned her about sudden financial movements. Her heart tightened. Richard had withdrawn $7,800 from their joint account over the past week. Several transactions stood out: a luxury hotel in Providence, an upscale restaurant in Newburyport, a boutique jewelry store in Brookline, a reservation deposit labeled Event Venue, Harborview Ballroom. Eleanor stared at the screen, not in shock, but in perfect, icy clarity. Money for Madison. Money for the staged anniversary spectacle. Money he assumed she wouldn't question because he believed she was still naive, still dependent, still blind. But she saw everything. She saved screenshots, timestamps, amounts, locations, and uploaded them to her secure drive. Every detail documented, every withdrawal recorded. Exactly as Irene had instructed. Richard called just as she finished. His voice was sugary, artificially bright. "Ellie, just checking in. I'm swamped with work today, but I thought we could go over plans tonight. I've got some great ideas for the guest list." "Guest list? Of course. 100 people," he added, laughing lightly as if they were planning the happiest night of their lives. "It'll be a night to remember." Eleanor's gaze slid to the certified deed on the table, its embossed seal catching the light. "Oh," she replied calmly, "I'm sure it will be." He didn't hear the double meaning. He never would. After the call, Eleanor placed the documents in her lockbox, slid it under the bed, and stood quietly in the dimming afternoon light. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing, watching, recording. Every step Richard took brought him closer to the moment he thought he controlled. And every step she took brought her closer to the moment that would shatter his illusion entirely. The advantage was hers now, silent, legal, unshakable. The morning before the anniversary event, Boston glowed under a pale winter sun, the kind that made the city look crisp and polished. Eleanor took the Green Line to Copley Square, moving with quiet purpose. She wasn't expected at the venue. Richard had insisted he would handle everything. But she wanted clarity, and clarity rarely came from staying home. The Fairmont Copley Plaza rose before her in its gold and stone elegance, a place where people celebrated milestones, not ambushes. She walked through the revolving doors, the scent of polished wood and expensive floral arrangements greeting her. A concierge directed her to the event wing. Eleanor took her time, moving with deliberate calm, as though she were any wife checking final details for a 25th anniversary celebration. She knew better. As she stepped into the hallway leading to the ballroom, she froze. Madison Cole stood by the entrance, bright blonde hair, expensive heels, a dress far too glamorous for a simple setup visit. She was talking loudly, laughing with a cluster of event staff. Eleanor slipped behind a decorative column, listening. Madison's voice floated through the air, sugary and bold. "He promised everything will be official soon," she said. "We've already started planning how we'll decorate the Cambridge place. It'll be perfect once the papers are signed." One of the staff members asked, "Signed? Like wedding papers?" Madison giggled. "Oh no, not that kind. Not yet, anyway." She lowered her voice proudly. "He said the apartment will be ours once his wife signs it over. Tomorrow's the big moment." The group laughed with her, unaware of the cruelty wrapped in her words. Eleanor's heart didn't race. It didn't break. Instead, something inside her crystallized, a clarity sharp as glass. Madison wasn't just involved. She was confident, too confident, which meant Richard had been promising her more than affection. He'd been promising her Eleanor's life. Madison continued. "Richard said the announcement tomorrow will change everything. And honestly, it's about time. She's had that apartment long enough. He deserves to move on. He deserves The entitlement in those two words struck Eleanor harder than anything else. She stepped back, unseen, and quietly moved away from the group. Her hands remained steady, her breath calm, but inside her, resolve settled like stone. She made her way toward the ballroom, where a restaurant manager, Mr. Linden, was reviewing seating charts. He recognized her immediately. "Oh, Mrs. Shaw, we weren't expecting you today. Everything's nearly ready. Your husband was just here yesterday finalizing the payment." Eleanor offered a soft, polite smile. "Payment?" "Yes," he said proudly. "He paid nearly $20,000 up front. Said this would be a night he'd remember forever." Then the manager lowered his voice conspiratorially, and he mentioned a big announcement. Something he said would start a new chapter. That's always exciting. A new chapter. Madison's excitement. The apartment they'll soon have. The documents she overheard at 3 a.m. The browser history. Martha's questions. It all collided into one clear conclusion. The anniversary celebration wasn't a celebration. It was a trap, a public one, a spectacle built to pressure her into signing away her home, her life, under the bright lights of applause and staged sympathy. Eleanor thanked the manager gently, turned, and walked out through the marble hallways of the Fairmont with unhurried steps. Her reflection in the polished walls looked different, sharper, steadier, composed in a way she hadn't seen in months. When she arrived home, the house felt oddly still, as if holding its breath. Richard returned an hour later, more energized than usual. He paced the living room, adjusting his tie even though he wasn't going anywhere. His hands moved constantly, straightening picture frames, smoothing his shirt, checking his watch, practicing. He caught Eleanor watching him and laughed nervously. "Big day tomorrow, huh? I want everything to be perfect." "For you," she said quietly, but he didn't hear the edge in her tone. He was too engrossed in rehearsing lines under his breath, phrases about gratitude, new beginnings, and moving forward. Words polished for an audience. Eleanor disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. On the bed, she laid out everything Irene told her to gather. Certified deed copies, financial screenshots, a printed timeline of Richard's suspicious behavior, inheritance documents, a notarized statement confirming her sole ownership. One by one, she slid them into a neat file folder. No trembling, no hesitation. Tomorrow, Richard believed he would stand on a stage and take everything from her. But Eleanor knew, finally, fully, that tomorrow was the day the balance would shift. Not for him. For her. She turned off the bedroom light, the folder tucked securely in her bag. She was ready. The next evening, the Fairmont Copley Plaza shimmered like something out of a winter dream. The ballroom glowed under towering chandeliers, each crystal catching the golden light and scattering it across the ivory-draped tables. Waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne flutes. The air sweet with candlelight and expensive floral arrangements. Nearly 100 guests gathered, colleagues, distant relatives, acquaintances who barely knew the Shaws but loved a grand event. Eleanor entered quietly, dressed in a simple but elegant navy gown, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. She looked like a woman prepared for an anniversary celebration. Yet she knew better than anyone that this night was not built for celebration at all. Across the room, she spotted Madison Cole. The younger woman had tried to blend in, wearing a modest dress and a lanyard that read Assistant, Shaw and Associates, pretending to be part of Richard's professional team. Eleanor almost admired the audacity. Almost. Madison's eyes flicked across the room, scanning the guests, lingering on the stage with barely concealed excitement. Richard, meanwhile, was everywhere, shaking hands, greeting guests with practiced warmth, gesturing dramatically as he spoke about what tonight represents. His confidence radiated off him like heat. Martha stood near the front, a champagne flute in hand. Lips curved in a small, triumphant smile. Then, just before dinner service began, Richard tapped a spoon against his glass. The ballroom fell into a hush. He stood on the small, decorated stage, a spotlight settling on him as if the entire night existed only for this moment. He placed a hand over his heart, an actor preparing for his monologue. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. 25 years, it's a long journey. A journey full of memories, challenges, and truth. Eleanor felt dozens of eyes shift toward her, then back to him. She kept her expression perfectly still. Richard continued, "I've been doing a lot of reflection lately. About life, about direction, about gratitude." He paused, letting the silence fill with anticipation. And sometimes moving toward the truth means making difficult decisions. Several guests murmured, sensing a shift in tone. He inhaled, his chest swelling as though he were about to deliver a heroic proclamation. "I believe in honesty and in being true to ourselves, which is why I feel it's time to share with all of you a very personal decision." Eleanor watched him closely. This was the moment, the ambush, the performance he'd been rehearsing. Richard adopted a solemn expression. "After a lot of thought, I've decided that Eleanor and I will be going our separate ways." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Cutlery clattered. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Richard, encouraged by the reaction, continued grandly, "We've grown apart. Life has taken us in different directions. And I believe we both deserve a chance at a new beginning." His eyes gleamed as he looked out at the audience, pretending to be vulnerable. "And I trust that Eleanor, being the generous and reasonable woman she is, will do the right thing with the Cambridge property as we move forward. She knows what matters most. She knows what a fair, respectful decision looks like." Eleanor remained motionless, her face composed. He pressed on, voice swelling with false righteousness. "Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes dignity means telling the truth, even when it's painful. And tonight, surrounded by the people who've supported us, I feel at peace." Martha dabbed her eyes with a napkin, as if witnessing a tender breakup instead of a carefully staged humiliation. Madison stood at the side of the room, her breath held, anticipation sparking in her eyes. Several guests murmured things like, "That poor man, he must be suffering." She always seemed distant. "He's being so noble." Richard absorbed it all, basking in the sympathy he had engineered. He spread his arms, slightly, as if embracing the room. "Please understand," he added smoothly, "I only want what's best for both of us. And I know Eleanor will handle the transition responsibly." He truly believed he had one. He believed the crowd was on his side. He believed pressure and public emotion would corner her. He believed the humiliation would break her into compliance. Richard stepped back, soaking in the applause of a few misguided guests who thought they were witnessing some heartfelt confession. His posture relaxed, his shoulders loosened. He had never been more confident, more certain that the moment he'd built, rehearsed, and orchestrated was unfolding exactly as he planned. He didn't know it yet, but the celebration he designed as a stage for Eleanor's downfall was about to become the stage for his own. For several long seconds after Richard's announcement, the ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence. The chandeliers gleamed overhead, the gold-white decor shimmering like a stage set for the wrong play. Some guests stared at Richard with startled sympathy. Others glanced awkwardly at Eleanor, waiting, wondering, unsure how to react. Eleanor rose slowly from her chair. No theatrics, no trembling, no rush, just quiet, undeniable presence. She stepped toward the stage, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Richard spotted her and forced a smile, assuming she would nod obediently, maybe cry a little, to complete his narrative. Instead, Eleanor reached for the microphone. A hush fell so complete it seemed to vacuum the air from the ballroom. Her voice was gentle, almost conversational. "Thank you, Richard, for your heartfelt speech." A murmur fluttered through the guests at her tone. Then she continued, calm as a winter tide. "Since we're being honest tonight, I think it's only fair that I share a few truths of my own." Richard stiffened. Madison's smile faltered. Martha set down her champagne glass with a faint clink. Eleanor clasped the microphone lightly. Her posture was poised, elegant, unshaken. "First," she said, "about our marriage growing apart. Richard is correct, though the reasons might surprise you." She looked at him, not with anger, not with tears, with certainty. For the past several months, Richard has been having an ongoing affair with his assistant, Madison Cole. Gasps erupted. Heads swiveled toward Madison, who instantly went pale. Eleanor continued without raising her voice. "They've been visiting hotels, jewelry stores, restaurants. I know because the charges came directly out of our joint bank account." She paused. "Over $7,800 in the past week alone." The room exhaled, collectively shocked. Madison hissed, "You told me you were getting a divorce weeks ago." But Eleanor lifted a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to reclaim the focus with effortless precision. "Second," she said, "about the Cambridge home. Richard implied I would do the right thing." She let out a small, almost amused breath. "The right thing is to correct his lie." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a crisp, notarized document. "This house is my separate property, purchased years before our marriage. Under Massachusetts law, Richard has zero claim to it, no matter how much he rehearsed his speech." The document gleamed under the light as she held it up briefly. Martha's face drained of color. Eleanor let the paper fall back into her bag. "Third, Richard mentioned new beginnings and honesty, yet he left out his hidden debts, his outstanding personal loans, and the financial misconduct he hoped I would absorb after he left." Another ripple surged through the audience, this one sharper, cutting. Richard stepped forward, voice cracking. "Eleanor, this isn't the place." "This," she said quietly, "is exactly the place." Her quiet composure made her words land with even greater force. "And finally, since we're talking about transitions, I want to thank my late aunt for leaving me her estate." She spoke the next sentences with calm clarity. "A condominium on the Upper West Side, a lakeside home in Vermont, and a substantial investment account." Gasps again, this time louder. Madison stared at Richard as if seeing him for the first time. "You told me you needed that Cambridge place because you too were broke. You lied to me." Richard grabbed for her arm, frantic. "Madison, don't make a scene." She yanked her hand away. "Don't touch me. You said she had nothing. You said she'd already agreed to sign the deed." Guests turned fully toward Richard now, expressions shifting from sympathy to disgust. Conversations sparked around the room, like small fires. "Cheating on your wife. Trying to take her home. He used the event money for his affair." "I can't believe this." Richard attempted to regain control, hands raised. "Everyone, please, this is being blown out of proportion." But Madison was done playing assistant. "You planned to leave her tonight, in front of everyone, and you told me you'd move me into her apartment next week." The room erupted. Martha tried to intervene, but her voice was drowned out by whispers, shock, and the crackling collapse of Richard's carefully built facade. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back from the microphone and let the truth finish what she had started. When the noise reached its peak, Richard arguing, Madison shouting, guests murmuring, Eleanor turned and walked off the stage. Her posture remained straight, her chin lifted with calm dignity. She walked past the white gold decor, past the champagne flutes, past the stunned guests whose whispers parted around her like water. She did not look back. She didn't need to. Richard's reputation was unraveling behind her in real time. Loud, messy, undeniable. But Eleanor? She left the ballroom untouched, composed, triumphant in her silence. The truth had spoken for her. 3 months later, winter had thawed into a pale, reluctant spring. The chill still lingered over Boston's brick-lined streets, but sunlight stretched longer each afternoon, hinting at renewal. On a quiet Monday morning, Eleanor walked into the Suffolk County Family Court with Irene beside her. Inside the courtroom, fluorescent lights hummed softly over worn wooden benches. Richard stood at the far end, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. His once immaculate suits had been replaced by a wrinkled, ill-fitting off-brand blazer. His hair was unkempt, his shoulders slumped. The confident man who had orchestrated a 100-person spectacle was gone. In his place stood someone hollowed out by consequence. The clerk called the case. Judge Merriman, stern and unbothered by Richard's attempts at charm, reviewed the documentation. Eleanor watched without emotion. Everything had already been written, notarized, stamped. Truth had a way of sitting firmly on paper. The judge spoke clearly. First, the Cambridge property. Documents confirm it was purchased solely by Mrs. Shaw before the marriage. It is classified as separate property under Massachusetts law. Mr. Shaw has no legal or equitable claim to it. Richard shifted, jaw tightening. Eleanor remained still. Second, the judge continued. The land plot acquired during the marriage is considered marital property. It will be divided equally. A fair ruling. Eleanor nodded slightly. Third, the car, also marital property, will be split according to standard equity guidelines. Mrs. Shaw will retain the vehicle, but compensate Mr. Shaw for half its appraised value. Richard perked up, as if waiting for vindication, but it never came. Fourth, the debts. The judge glanced over his glasses at Richard. Financial records show over $40,000 in loans and credit charges taken out solely by Mr. Shaw. These include hotel expenditures, jewelry purchases, and other personal expenses not associated with the marriage. A few spectators in the courtroom exchanged looks. These debts, the judge declared, belong exclusively to Mr. Shaw. Richard's face flushed red. Your Honor, those charges were— The judge held up a hand. Mr. Shaw, this court will not entertain excuses. The documentation is irrefutable. Sit down. His voice echoed with finality. Richard's shoulders sagged. Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She only breathed a little easier, as if a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted into the air and dissolved. When the session ended, Richard erupted. This is unfair. She planned this. She turned everyone against me. Judge Merriman didn't look up. One more outburst, Mr. Shaw, and you will be escorted out. Irene touched Eleanor's arm. Let's go, she whispered. As they stepped into the hallway, Richard's voice still echoed behind them, growing hoarse and desperate. None of it touched her. Later that week, the final blow arrived. The scandal from the anniversary party, the public affair, the humiliation attempt, the loud argument with Madison, had reached Richard's workplace. A client had filmed parts of Madison's confrontation and shared it online. The video spread quickly through their industry, painting him as unprofessional, manipulative, and volatile. He was terminated with immediate effect. Eleanor heard about it from a neighbor, then from Sarah, then from Irene. But she simply listened without comment. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence, arriving right on schedule. Her own life, meanwhile, opened gently into something new. With her inheritance secure and the Cambridge home hers alone, Eleanor began turning an old dream into reality. She rented a small studio space near Beacon Hill, polished the manuscript she had been working on for years, and opened a tiny independent publishing business. Nothing flashy, nothing grand, just hers. She traveled to Vermont on weekends, restoring the lakeside cottage, painting its porch, planting herbs along the walkway. The quiet there soothed her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. And for the first time in decades, she woke each morning without dread, without whispers, without performance, just peace. On a clear evening in early June, she stood at the window of her Cambridge home, looking out over the glowing Boston skyline, a patchwork of warm lights, soft clouds, and possibilities she had once been too afraid to imagine. Her life was hers again, entirely, confidently, beautifully hers. No audience, no ambushes, no traps, just a woman standing in her own quiet victory